when my sister said what had happened. So, yeah, no, I remember it, like yesterday.
It was a moment the world would never forget. Two boys, barely teenagers, walking behind their mother's coffin as millions watched in stunned silence. Image was heartbreaking, but it was also a lie. For years, the world believed Prince William and Prince Harry had chosen to take part in that solemn procession. Now, Charles Spencer, Diana's brother, has broken his silence, and what he reveals changes everything. They were never given a choice. Behind palace walls, Spencer fought desperately to protect his nephews from what he called an unthinkable cruelty. He pleaded, he resisted, but in the end, the royal institution won, and the boys were pushed into history's most haunting funeral march. Spencer's revelations don't end there. His eulogy, watched by 2.5 billion people, defied royal protocol and stunned the monarchy. It was a line in the sand, one that many believe began a quiet unraveling within the royal family. And years later, one of those boys, Prince Harry, would do something no one saw coming. The phone call that changed everything. It was the early hours of August 31st, 1997. Charles Spencer was asleep in South Africa when the phone rang, sharp, jarring, slicing through the quiet night. On the line, a voice calm but strained. Diana had been in a car accident in Paris. It was serious. She was fighting for her life. Spencer's heart sank. He didn't need to ask how it happened. He already knew. The same photographers who had chased his sister through tunnels and alleys, who had turned every waking moment of her life into a spectacle, they had gone too far. But this wasn't just another close call. This time, there would be no escape. An hour later, the second call came. The voice was colder, quieter, heavy with finality. "I'm sorry, sir." She didn't make it. For a moment, there was only silence. Diana was gone, and with her, something unspoken and sacred had been shattered. But Spencer had no idea, not yet, that the worst was still to come. Because while he grieved in solitude, thousands of miles from London, the palace stood silent. No official statement, no black armbands, no flag at half-mast. It was as if Diana, the most beloved woman in Britain, had simply vanished. And in that silence, something began to stir, a public fury that would rattle the monarchy to its core. As the news of Diana's death echoed across the globe, something remarkable happened. Grown men wept in public. Women collapsed in grief. Outside Buckingham Palace, seas of flowers bloomed overnight, piles so vast they spilled into the streets. Candlelight vigils, songs, tears. The world was mourning its princess. But one question hung in the air like fog. Where were the royals? For 5 long, aching days, the royal family remained hidden behind the stone walls of Balmoral Castle in Scotland. No flags were lowered, no words of sorrow spoken, not a single appearance from the Queen. The silence was thunderous. British newspapers cried out in outrage. "Where's our Queen? Speak to us. Show us you care." And for the first time in living memory, the very foundation of the monarchy began to tremble. But beyond the headlines and public fury was something even more devastating. What was happening to Diana's sons behind those castle walls? William, 15. Harry, just 12. They were told their mother was gone. Not gently, not lovingly, but with cold, clinical finality. No hugs, no warmth, just duty. Harry would later recall how, in those early days, the palace felt like a tomb. No one spoke of Diana. No one said her name. The boys were expected to grieve in silence, to hold their pain like they held their titles. But these weren't just future kings and princes. They were children. Children who had lost their mother in the most violent, public way imaginable, and were offered nothing but silence in return. Eventually, the pressure became unbearable. On September 5th, Queen Elizabeth appeared on national television. Her voice was calm, her words careful, but for many it was too little, too late. The damage was done. And in those 5 days of royal silence, the public saw something they could never unsee: the emotional vacuum at the heart of the crown. A monarchy that Diana had spent her life trying to soften had exposed its coldest face yet. The battle over the boys. When Charles Spencer learned that William and Harry would be forced to walk behind their mother's coffin, His reaction was immediate and fierce. Never, he told the Buckingham Palace courtier who had casually mentioned the plan. The idea of parading two traumatized children in front of the world's cameras seemed barbaric to him. Spencer knew Diana better than anyone. She had protected those boys fiercely, shielding them from the worst of the media circus whenever possible. The thought of her sons being forced to walk that agonizing route while cameras captured their every expression would have horrified her. She would never have wanted them to do this, Spencer argued with palace officials. But the royal machine was already in motion. It has been decided, came the cold response from the palace. Spencer pushed back harder, calling the plan cruel and unnatural. How could they make children walk behind their mother's coffin? What kind of message did that send the world about how the monarchy treated its most vulnerable members? Then came the manipulation that would haunt Spencer for years. At some point during the heated discussions, he was told that William and Harry actually wanted to walk in procession. If that was true, Spencer reasoned, then who was he to interfere with their wishes? Reluctantly, he stepped back from the fight. It wasn't until years later that the devastating truth emerged. Prince Harry finally admitted publicly that they had never been given a choice at all. They were simply told what they would do, and as children in the royal system, they had no power to refuse. Spencer had been lied to, and his nephews had paid the price for that deception. The funeral walk that traumatized two children. September 6, 1997. The streets of London were lined with millions of mourners, their faces streaked with tears as they waited for Diana's funeral procession pass. The atmosphere was thick with grief, so palpable you could almost touch it. And then they appeared, two small figures walking behind their mother's coffin, their faces pale and expressionless. Spencer walked alongside them, his heart breaking with every step. He could see what the cameras couldn't capture, the way Harry's hands trembled slightly, how William's jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. These weren't the composed young princes the world saw on television. These were traumatized children going through hell in front of 2.5 billion viewers. The walk from Kensington Palace to Westminster Abbey took 25 agonizing minutes. 25 minutes of cameras zooming in on their faces, analyzing their every micro-expression for signs of emotion. 25 minutes of sobbing from the crowds that seemed to echo off the buildings around them. 25 minutes that would haunt Harry for the rest of his life. Harry later described feeling completely numb during the walk, as if his emotions had simply shut down to protect him from the overwhelming trauma. He felt like he was watching someone else's life unfold, disconnected from his own body, as it mechanically put one foot in front of the other. It was a coping mechanism that would define his relationship with public life for decades to come. For Spencer, watching his nephews endure that ordeal was almost unbearable. He had fought to protect them and failed. Now, all he could do was walk beside them and witness what he considered to be one of the greatest injustices in royal history. But his chance for revenge was coming, and when it arrived, he wouldn't waste it. The speech that shook the monarchy. Inside Westminster Abbey, as Spencer approached the podium to deliver his eulogy, no one knew what was coming. What followed would go down as one of the most explosive speeches in royal funeral history, a direct attack on the very institution that had gathered to mourn. Spencer didn't just praise his sister, he weaponized her memory. He called Diana the most hunted person of the modern age, a direct accusation against the media machine that had chased her to her death. But then he turned his fire on an even bigger target, the royal family themselves. Diana needed no royal title to continue to generate her particular brand of magic, Spencer declared, his words cutting through the abbey like a blade. The message was clear. Diana's power had never come from the monarchy. If anything, they had dimmed her light, not enhanced it. She was special in spite of them, not because of them, but Spencer wasn't finished. In front of the Queen, Prince Charles, and the entire royal establishment, he made a promise that sent shockwaves through the monarchy. We, your blood family, will do all we can to continue the imaginative and loving way in which you were steering these two exceptional young men. The implication was devastating. Spencer was essentially telling the world that the royal family had failed as guardians, and that Diana's real family would now step in to protect William and Harry. It was a direct challenge to royal authority, delivered at their own gathering, broadcast to billions of people worldwide. Then something unprecedented happened. The crowd inside Westminster Abbey, filled with dignitaries, celebrities, and political figures, began to applaud. You simply don't clap at royal funerals. Ever. But Spencer had said what millions were thinking, and they couldn't contain their approval. The Queen sat stone-faced, but the damage was done. The monarchy had been publicly challenged, and the world had chosen sides. The promise he couldn't keep. Spencer's bold words a day carried the weight of genuine intention, but the harsh reality of royal protocol would soon crush his noble plans. Despite his passionate promise to protect William and Harry, the boys were already too deeply embedded in the royal system for anyone to extract them. The monarchy controlled every aspect of their lives, their education, their schedules, their public appearances, even their private relationships. Spencer quickly realized that his grand declaration had been more emotional than practical. He simply didn't have the power to compete with an institution that had been perfecting its control for over 1,000 years. In later interviews, Spencer admitted his failure with obvious pain. He had meant every word of his funeral speech, but wanting to protect his nephews and actually being able to do so were two very different things. The boys needed him, but the system was stronger than one man's love, no matter how fierce. The guilt ate at him for years. He had made a public promise in front of the entire world, and he couldn't keep it. William and Harry remained trapped in the same rigid system that had slowly destroyed their mother. They were raised to be proper royals, not the free-spirited children Diana had wanted them to be. But Spencer's failure wasn't complete. His words that day had planted seeds that would take decades to grow. He had publicly identified the problem, named the enemy, and shown the world that there was another way to think about the royal family. That message would eventually reach the person who needed to hear it most. Harry himself. Harry's ultimate escape. By 2020, Prince Harry had become a walking reminder of his mother's tragic fate. Every camera flash took him back to that night in Paris. Every negative headline about his wife Meghan felt like history repeating itself in the cruelest possible way. And just like Diana, he was watching the woman he loved being systematically destroyed by the same forces that had claimed his mother. The parallels were terrifying. Meghan faced the same relentless media scrutiny that had driven Diana to desperation. She dealt with the same lack of support from within the palace walls. She struggled with the same impossible expectations and rigid protocols that had suffocated his mother's spirit. Harry could see exactly where the story was heading, and he refused to let it end the same way. In one of his most emotional interviews, Harry admitted that he felt completely helpless watching history repeat itself. But unlike his mother, he had an option she never did. He could leave. And in 2020, that's exactly what he did. Harry and Meghan made the shocking decision to step back from royal duties and move to the United States, cutting official ties with the institution that had defined their entire lives. It was the boldest move any royal had made in modern history. But for Harry, it wasn't rebellion. It was survival. He had learned from his mother's tragedy that the royal system doesn't change for anyone, no matter how much you sacrifice or how hard you try to make it work. The only way to win was not to play. Charles Spencer, the man who had tried and failed to protect Harry as a child, quietly supported his nephew's decision. While he never made public statements about Harry's departure, those close to the family knew that Spencer understood better than anyone why Harry had to leave. After all, Spencer had been warning about this exact outcome for over 2 decades. Harry's escape wasn't just personal vindication. It was a completion of something his mother had started. Diana had tried to break free from royal constraints in her final years, distancing herself from the monarchy and speaking openly about her struggles. She was redefining what it meant to be royal when her life was cut short. Harry simply finished what she had begun, the legacy of a brother's love. Today, more than 25 years after that devastating funeral speech, Charles Spencer's words continue to echo through the halls of royal power. His brutal honesty about Diana's treatment changed how the world sees a monarchy, stripping away the fairy tale veneer to reveal the cold machinery underneath. Spencer never backed down from his criticism, never softened his stance for the sake of family peace. In interview after interview, he continued to speak the truth about his sister's suffering, ensuring that her story wouldn't be sanitized or forgotten. He became the keeper of Diana's real legacy, not the sanitized royal version, but the raw, honest truth about a woman who was broken by the institution she had tried so hard to serve. His fight for William and Harry, though ultimately unsuccessful in traditional sense, planted seeds that would bloom in unexpected ways. While he couldn't remove them from the royal system as children, he gave them something even more valuable: the intellectual framework to understand that the system was the problem, not them. The funeral speech that made headlines around the world wasn't just a moment of grief-fueled anger. It was a roadmap for resistance, a public declaration that the royal family could be challenged, criticized, and held accountable. That message eventually reached Harry, who used it to justify the most dramatic royal departure in modern history. Spencer's promise to protect Diana's sons may have seemed like a failure, but in the end, he gave them something more powerful than protection. He gave them permission to save themselves. And in Harry's case, that permission ultimately led to freedom. The story of Charles Spencer and Princess Diana's funeral reveals a truth that the royal family desperately wanted to keep hidden: that behind all the pageantry and tradition lies a system that crushes the human spirit in service of maintaining power. Spencer saw it, named it, and fought against it. And while he couldn't change the system, he changed how we see it. And that may be the most powerful legacy of all.